Hi, I'm James Kennedy with Flourish Family Therapy.
And I'm Jennifer Kennedy with Flourish Family Therapy. And as a licensed professional counselor, I've spent most of my career working with clients who have personality disorders.
Today we're going to be looking at the case of Theodore Robert Bundy, better known as Ted Bundy, probably the most notorious serial murderer in the history of the United States. I'll start by examining the background of Ted Bundy and his crimes, and then Jenn will provide her analysis of Bundy himself.
Before we get started, if you or someone you know can benefit from our counseling services, please reach out to us at flourishfamilytherapy.com.
And here we go. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946. His mother was Louise Cowell, who was unmarried at the time of Bundy's conception and birth. Over the years, Louise gave conflicting information concerning the identity of Ted's father. Louise and Ted originally lived with Louise's parents in a small town in Pennsylvania. Ted was told that his grandparents were actually his parents and that his mother Louise was really his sister. It's unclear when Ted found out the truth about his paternity, but he did later express anger toward his mother for lying to him. There are also some reports that Ted's grandfather was a cruel and violent individual, but this has never been confirmed. When Ted was 5 years old, Louise and Ted moved to Washington State, and Louise soon married a hospital cook named Johnny Bundy. Shortly thereafter, Ted's last name was changed to Bundy. Johnny and Louise went on to have 4 additional children together. As a child, Ted was described as mean-spirited. It is said he liked to instill fear in others and that he engaged in animal cruelty. By the time he reached high school, Ted was seen as shy and introverted. He later admitted to developing a fascination with the detective magazines of the time, which often featured pictures of terrified women in various forms of bondage. Bundy also said that it was around this time that he discovered hardcore pornography and he began peeping in women's windows. By 1967, Bundy was a student at the University of Washington. Here he became romantically involved with a fellow student named Diane Edwards. By all accounts, Ted was deeply infatuated with Diane and was devastated when, after over a year of dating, she ended the relationship. It is perhaps significant that Diane had long, dark hair that she often wore parted in the middle. More on that later. It is widely believed that Ted's attacks on women began in 1974. His first victim survived, but many others would not be so lucky. Between 1974 and 1975, Bundy assaulted and murdered around 30 women in the states of Washington, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado. He often lured victims to his Volkswagen Bug by using some sort of ruse. For instance, Bundy would sometimes wear a homemade sling on his arm and ask a potential victim for help carrying his books back to his car. Bundy's good looks and charm helped make him a very successful serial killer. He was even able to abduct 2 women on the same day from a crowded park in Washington. Bundy later admitted that he was usually intoxicated when he hunted for his victims. Most of Bundy's victims were attractive women in their late teens or early 20s, but a few were much younger. Many victims also had long dark hair parted in the middle. As mentioned earlier, this was something they had in common with Bundy's first girlfriend, Diane. During much of his murder spree, Bundy was seriously dating a woman named Elizabeth Klepfer. Klepfer had a 3-year-old daughter, and Bundy quickly became a surrogate father figure to the young girl. Most of Ted's victims were bludgeoned or strangled, or both. Many of the bodies were then dumped or buried in remote wooded areas. Bundy would often return to the dump sites to engage in further activities with the bodies. He also decapitated at least 5 victims and took the heads back to his apartment. While awaiting trial for murder in Colorado, Bundy twice escaped from custody. He eventually made his way to Florida, and in the early morning hours of January 15, 1978, he attacked 5 co-eds at Florida State University in Tallahassee. 2 of the victims died from their injuries. 3 weeks later, he kidnapped and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach in Lake City. Bundy was soon recaptured and charged with 3 counts of murder by the state of Florida. Bundy had briefly been a law student and often acted as his own attorney during his trials in Florida. He also managed to marry a woman named Carol Boone as she was testifying in the sentencing phase of the Kimberly Leach trial in 1980. Boone later gave birth to Bundy's child, a girl named Rose, that they managed to conceive while Bundy was incarcerated on death row. Bundy received 3 death sentences for the murders in Florida, but he continued to maintain his innocence until shortly before his execution. He eventually confessed to murdering somewhere between 35 and 40 women, but the true number of victims remains unknown. Ted Bundy died in Florida's electric chair on January 24, 1989.
This case provides a complex view of pathology that intersects with several criteria outlined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5, the DSM-5, particularly those associated with antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, and potentially other psychological conditions. As a guideline, one can hypothesize about the mental health conditions that might apply to Ted Bundy based on the behaviors and characteristics reported in various sources. It is important to remember that Bundy was never formally diagnosed by a mental health professional in a manner that is publicly known. So this discussion is purely hypothetical and based on his documented actions and behaviors. Let's look at Bundy's known behaviors and characteristics that might align with DSM criteria, focusing on ASPD due to its relevance to his criminal history. An individual must exhibit a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since the age of 15 years, as indicated by at least 3 of 7 behaviors. Bundy met all 7. Let's review those first. 1. Failure to conform to social norms and respect to lawful behaviors. Bundy's long history of criminal activities, including kidnapping, rape, burglary, and murder, starkly demonstrates a failure to conform to social norms and laws. 2. Deceitfulness. Bundy frequently used deceit and manipulation to lure his victims. He often pretended to be injured or to be an authority figure, such as posing as a police officer to gain trust before abducting his victims. 3. Impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. While Bundy exhibited significant planning in some of his crimes, his decision to abduct victims in broad daylight or in areas where he could easily be seen suggests a degree of impulsivity. 4. Irritability and aggressiveness. Reports from individuals who knew Bundy personally or had escaped from him describe him as being capable of sudden aggression. 5. Reckless disregard for safety or self or others. Bundy's murders and the manner in which he carried them out, including returning to crime scenes, demonstrate a disregard for the safety and lives of others, as well as a lack of concern for his own capture. 6. Consistent irresponsibility. There were periods in Bundy's life where he failed to maintain consistent work and relied on theft to support him. 7. Lack of remorse. Bundy often displayed a lack of genuine remorse for his actions. In interviews, he would deflect blame onto various factors such as pornography or social issues rather than accepting full responsibility for his crimes. The next criteria an individual has to meet for an ASPD diagnosis is the individual is at least 18. Bundy met that and continued crimes well into his adulthood. An additional criteria Bundy met was an onset of conduct disorder before age 15. Some of Bundy's childhood accounts are varied, but there are indications of troubling behavior, suggesting possible instances of voyeurism and cruelty to animals, which would meet the diagnostic criteria for conduct disorder. The final diagnostic criteria for ASPD is that the occurrence of antisocial behavior is not exclusively during course of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. There's no substantial evidence suggesting that Bundy's antisocial behavior was due to schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, making his actions more aligned with ASPD. There is a belief based on one of his last interviews that he could have been bipolar, but that is speculative. Bundy's behaviors and interactions also suggest features of narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. This condition is marked by a grandiose sense of self-importance, a need for excessive admiration, and a lack of empathy towards others. Bundy's charm, his belief in his superiority and intelligence, and his manipulation of those around him, including the media and his defense team, could be indicative of narcissistic personality disorder traits. One needs to exhibit at least 5 of the diagnostic criteria. Bundy fit all 9, along with enduring patterns of behavior that caused significant distress or impairment. Let's review these. 1. Grandiosity. Bundy displayed a grandiose sense of self-importance. He believed himself to be intellectually superior and often boasted about his accomplishments, even when they were fabricated or exaggerated. For example, he frequently claimed to have attended prestigious universities or held prestigious jobs, which were later found to be false. 2. Fantasies of success, power, and beauty. Bundy's crimes were driven by fantasies of power and control. He meticulously planned his murders and often revisited crime scenes to bask in his perceived superiority over law enforcement. Additionally, he targeted victims who fit a certain physical type, which may reflect his obsession with beauty and his desire for control over his victims' appearances. 3. Need for admiration. Bundy craved admiration and attention from others. He was known to charm his victims and manipulate those around him to gain trust and admiration. Bundy's ability to manipulate others, including law enforcement and prison staff, demonstrate his needs for constant validation and admiration. 4. Belief of being special or unique. Bundy believed he was special and unique and that he was only understood by other special or high status people. He was known to brag about the prestigious universities he attended or jobs he held, which were all false. 5. Sense of entitlement. Bundy exhibited a sense of entitlement in his belief that he was above the law and societal norms. He felt entitled to exert control over his victims and believed he could manipulate any situation to his advantage. This entitlement was evident in his repeated escapes from custody and his attempts to represent himself in court, believing he was more competent than his legal counsel. Number 6. Lack of empathy. One of the hallmark traits of NPD is lack of empathy. Bundy showed a profound lack of remorse or empathy for his victims. He viewed them as objects to fulfill his own desires rather than as individuals with feelings and rights. Even when confronted with evidence of his crimes, Bundy showed little to no remorse and often attempted to deflect blame onto others. Number 7. Interpersonally exploitative. Bundy took advantage of others to achieve his own desires by murdering his victims after manipulating them. Number 8. Belief others are envious of them. While specific examples of Bundy's envy are not as readily available, his pattern of behavior suggests underlying feelings of envy towards those he perceived as more successful or socially adept. Additionally, Bundy's insistence on maintaining a facade of charm and competence may reflect a fear of others surpassing him or seeing him through his carefully crafted image. Number 9. Arrogance or haughtiness. Bundy displayed arrogance not only in his crimes, but also when he represented himself in court. While Bundy displayed characteristics consistent of ASPD and possibly NPD, it is important to remember that any assessment would need to consider the complexity of human psychology, the unique interplay of genetics, environmental, and personal history factors that contribute to an individual's mental health status. Bundy's ability to lead a seemingly normal life in some respects, including attending college and forming relationships, complicates the psychological profile. The behaviors of Ted Bundy, as reported, suggest he might have met criteria for ASPD and possibly NPD, according to the DSM-5. However, such assessments are speculative and do not replace the insights that would be gained from a direct clinical evaluation.
That's our look at the case of Ted Bundy. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe to our channel and let us know what you think in the comments.
Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to visit us at flourishfamilytherapy.com.